25th Session Agenda Item 85. Resolution adopted by the General Assembly adopted on a report from the 6th Committee /8082. 2625 XXV. Declaration on Principles of International Law Concerning Friendly Relations and Cooperation among States in accordance with the Charter of the United Nations. The General Assembly, recalling its resolutions 1815-17 of the 18th of December 1962, 1966, 18 of the 16th of December 1963, 2103 XX of the 20th of December 1965, 2181 XXI of the 12th of December 1966, 2327 XXI of the 18th of December 1967, 2463 XXII of the 20th of December 1968 and 2533 XXIV of the 8th of December 1969, in which it affirmed the importance of the progressive development and codification of the principles of international law concerning friendly relations and cooperation among states, having considered the report of the Special Committee on Principles of International Law Concerning Friendly Relations and Cooperation Among States, which met in Geneva from the 31st of March to the 1st of May 1970, emphasizing the paramount importance of the Charter of the United Nations for the maintenance of international peace and security and for the development of friendly relations and cooperation among states, deeply convinced that the adoption of the Declaration on Principles of International Law Concerning Friendly Relations and Cooperation Among States in accordance with the Charter of the United Nations on the occasion of the 25th anniversary of the United Nations will contribute to the strengthening of world peace and constitute a landmark in the development of international law and of relations among states, in promoting the rule of law among nations and particularly the universal application of the principles embodied in the Charter. Considering the desirability of the wide dissemination of the text of the Declaration, 1. Approves the Declaration on Principles of International Law Concerning Friendly Relations and Cooperation Among States in accordance with the Charter of the United Nations, the text of which is annexed to the present resolution. 2. Expresses its appreciation to the Special Committee on Principles of International Law Concerning Friendly Relations and Cooperation Among States for its work resulting in the elaboration of the Declaration. 3. Recommends that all efforts be made so that the Declaration becomes generally known. 1883rd Plenary Meeting, the 24th of October 1970. Annex. Declaration on Principles of International Law Concerning Friendly Relations and Cooperation Among States in accordance with the Charter of the United Nations. Preamble. The General Assembly, reaffirming in the terms of the Charter of the United Nations that the maintenance of international peace and security and the development of friendly relations and cooperation between nations are among the fundamental purposes of the United Nations, recalling that the peoples of the United Nations are determined to practice tolerance and live together in peace with one another as good neighbors, bearing in mind the importance of maintaining and strengthening international peace founded upon freedom, equality, justice and respect for fundamental human rights, and of developing friendly relations among nations irrespective of their political, economic and social systems or the levels of their development, bearing in mind also the paramount importance of the Charter of the United Nations in the promotion of the rule of law among nations, considering that the faithful observance of the principles of international law concerning friendly relations and cooperation among states and the fulfillment in good faith of the obligations assumed by states, in accordance with the Charter, is of the greatest importance for the maintenance of international peace and security and for the implementation of the other purposes of the United Nations, noting that the great political, economic and social changes and scientific progress which have taken place in the world since the adoption of the Charter give increased importance to these principles and to the need for their more effective application in the conduct of states wherever carried on, recalling the established principle that outer space, including the moon and other celestial bodies, is not subject to national appropriation by claim of sovereignty, by means of use or occupation, or by any other means, and mindful of the fact that consideration is being given in the United Nations to the question of establishing other appropriate provisions similarly inspired. Convinced that the strict observance by states of the obligation not to intervene in the affairs of any other state is an essential condition to ensure that nations live together in peace with one another, since the practice of any form of intervention not only violates the spirit and letter of the Charter, but also leads to the creation of situations which threaten international peace and security, recalling the duty of states to refrain in their international relations from military, political, economic or any other form of coercion aimed against the political independence or territorial integrity of any state, considering it essential that all states shall refrain in their international relations from the threat or use of force against the territorial integrity or political independence of any state, or in any other manner inconsistent with the purposes of the United Nations, considering it equally essential that all states shall settle their international disputes by peaceful means in accordance with the Charter, reaffirming, in accordance with the Charter, the basic importance of sovereign equality and stressing that the purposes of the United Nations can be implemented only if states enjoy sovereign equality and comply fully with the requirements of this principle in their international relations. Convinced that the subjection of peoples to alien subjugation, domination and exploitation constitutes a major obstacle to the promotion of international peace and security, convinced that the principle of equal rights and self-determination of peoples constitutes a significant contribution to contemporary international law, and that its effective application is of paramount importance for the promotion of friendly relations among states, based on respect for the principle of sovereign equality, convinced in consequence that any attempt aimed at the partial or total disruption of the national unity and territorial integrity of a state or country or at its political independence is incompatible with the purposes and principles of the Charter. Considering the provisions of the Charter as a whole and taking into account the role of relevant resolutions adopted by the competent organs of the United Nations relating to the content of the principles, considering that the progressive development and codification of the following principles, the principle that states shall refrain in their international relations from the threat or use of force against the territorial integrity or political independence of any state, or in any other manner inconsistent with the purposes of the United Nations, the principle that states shall settle their international disputes by peaceful means in such a manner that international peace and security and justice are not endangered, the duty not to intervene in matters within the domestic jurisdiction of any state, in accordance with the Charter, the duty of states to cooperate with one another in accordance with the Charter, the principle of equal rights and self-determination of peoples, the principle of sovereign equality of states, the principle that states shall fulfill in good faith the obligations assumed by them in accordance with the Charter, so as to secure their more effective application within the international community, would promote the realization of the purposes of the United Nations, having considered the principles of international law relating to friendly relations and cooperation among states. 1. Solemnly proclaims the following principles. The principle that states shall refrain in their international relations from the threat or use of force against the territorial integrity or political independence of any state or in any other manner inconsistent with the purposes of the United Nations. Every state has the duty to refrain in its international relations from the threat or use of force against the territorial integrity or political independence of any state, or in any other manner inconsistent with the purposes of the United Nations. Such a threat or use of force constitutes a violation of international law and the nations and shall never be employed as a means of settling international issues. A war of aggression constitutes a crime against the peace, for which there is responsibility under international law. In accordance with the purposes and principles of the United Nations, states have the duty to refrain from propaganda for wars of aggression. Every state has the duty to refrain from the threat or use of force to violate the existing international boundaries of another state or as a means of solving international disputes, including territorial disputes and problems concerning frontiers of states. Every state likewise has the duty to refrain from the threat or use of force to violate international lines of demarcation, such as armistice lines, established by or pursuant to an international agreement to which it is a party or which it is otherwise bound to respect. Nothing in the foregoing shall be construed as prejudicing the positions of the parties concerned with regard to the status and effects of such lines under their special regimes or as affecting their temporary character. States have a duty to refrain from acts of reprisal involving the use of force. Every state has the duty to refrain from any forcible action which deprives peoples referred to in the elaboration of the principle of equal rights and self-determination of their right to self-determination and freedom and independence. Every state has the duty to refrain from organizing or encouraging the organization of irregular forces or armed bands including mercenaries, for incursion into the territory of another state. Every state has the duty to refrain from organizing, instigating, assisting or participating in acts of civil strife or terrorist acts in another state or acquiescing in organized activities within its territory directed towards the commission of such acts, when the acts referred to in the present paragraph involve a threat or use of force. The territory of a state shall not be the object of military occupation resulting from the use of force in contravention of the provisions of the Charter. The territory of a state shall not be the object of acquisition by another state resulting from the threat or use of force. No territorial acquisition resulting from the threat or use of force shall be recognized as legal. Nothing in the foregoing shall be construed as affecting provisions of the Charter or any international agreement prior to the Charter regime and valid under international law, or the powers of the Security Council under the Charter. All states shall pursue in good faith negotiations for the early conclusion of a universal treaty on general and complete disarmament under effective international control and strive to adopt appropriate measures to reduce international tensions and strengthen confidence among states. All states shall comply in good faith with their obligations under the generally recognized principles and rules of international law with respect to the maintenance of international peace and security, and shall endeavor to make the United Nations security system based on the Charter more effective. Nothing in the foregoing paragraphs shall be construed as enlarging or diminishing in any way the scope of the provisions of the Charter concerning cases in which the use of force is lawful. The principle that states shall settle their international disputes by peaceful means in such a manner that international peace and security and justice are not endangered. Every state shall settle its international disputes with other states by peaceful means in such a manner that international peace and security and justice are not endangered. States shall accordingly seek early and just settlement of their international disputes by negotiation, inquiry, mediation, conciliation, arbitration, judicial settlement, resort to regional agencies or arrangements or other peaceful means of their choice. In seeking such a settlement the parties shall agree upon such peaceful means as may be appropriate to the circumstances and nature of the dispute. The parties to a dispute have the duty, in the event of failure to reach a solution by any one of the above peaceful means, to continue to seek a settlement of the dispute by other peaceful means agreed upon by them. States parties to an international dispute, as well as other states, shall refrain from any action which may aggravate the situation so as to endanger the maintenance of international peace and security, and shall act in accordance with the purposes and principles of the United Nations. International disputes shall be settled on the basis of the sovereign equality of states and in accordance with the principle of free choice of means. Recourse to or acceptance of a settlement procedure freely agreed to by states with regard to existing or future disputes to which they are parties shall not be regarded as incompatible with sovereign equality. Nothing in the foregoing paragraphs prejudices or derogates from the applicable provisions of the Charter, in particular those relating to the pacific settlement of international disputes. The principle concerning the duty not to intervene in matters within the domestic jurisdiction of any state, in accordance with the Charter. No state or group of states has the right to intervene, directly or indirectly, for any reason whatever, in the internal or external affairs of any other state. Consequently, armed intervention and all other forms of interference or attempted threats against the personality of the state or against its political, economic and cultural elements are in violation of international law. No state may use or encourage the use of economic, political or any other type of measures to coerce another state in order to obtain from it the subordination of the exercise of its sovereign rights and to secure from it advantages of any kind. Also, no state shall organize, assist, foment, finance, incite or tolerate subversive, terrorist or armed activities directed towards the violent overthrow of the regime of another state, or interfere in civil strife in another state. The use of force to deprive peoples of their national identity constitutes a violation of their inalienable rights and of the principle of non-intervention. Every state has an inalienable right to choose its political, economic, social and cultural systems, without interference in any form by another state. Nothing in the foregoing paragraphs shall be construed as reflecting the relevant provisions of the Charter relating to the maintenance of international peace and security. The duty of states to cooperate with one another in accordance with the Charter. States have the duty to cooperate with one another, irrespective of the differences in their political, economic and social systems, in the various spheres of international relations, in order to maintain international peace and security and to promote international economic stability and progress, the general welfare of nations and international cooperation free from discrimination based on such differences. To this end, states shall cooperate with other states in the maintenance of international peace and security. States shall cooperate in the promotion of universal respect for, and observance of, human rights and fundamental freedoms for all, and in the elimination of all forms of racial discrimination and all forms of religious intolerance. States shall conduct their international relations in the economic, social, cultural, technical and trade fields in accordance with the principles of sovereign equality and non-intervention. States members of the United Nations have the duty to take joint and separate action in cooperation with the United Nations in accordance with the relevant provisions of the Charter. States should cooperate in the economic, social and cultural fields as well as in the field of science and technology and for the promotion of international cultural and educational progress. States should cooperate in the promotion of economic growth throughout the world, especially that of the developing countries. The principle of equal rights and self-determination of peoples. By virtue of the principle of equal rights and self-determination of peoples enshrined in the Charter of the United Nations, all peoples have the right freely to determine, without external interference, their political status and to pursue their economic, social and cultural development, and every state has the duty to respect this right in accordance with the provisions of the Charter. Every state has the duty to promote, through joint and separate action, realization of the principle of equal rights and self-determination of peoples, in accordance with the provisions of the Charter, and to render assistance to the United Nations in carrying out the responsibilities entrusted to it by the Charter regarding the implementation of the principle, in order to promote friendly relations and cooperation among states, and to bring a speedy end to colonialism, having due regard to the freely expressed will of the peoples concerned, and bearing in mind that subjection of peoples to alien subjugation, domination and exploitation constitutes a violation of the principle, as well as a denial of fundamental human rights, and is contrary to the Charter. Every state has the duty to promote through joint and separate action universal respect for and observance of human rights and fundamental freedoms in accordance with the Charter. The establishment of a sovereign and independent state, the free association or integration with an independent state or the emergence into any other political status freely determined by a people constitute modes of implementing the right of self-determination by that people. Every state has the duty to refrain from any forcible action which deprives peoples referred to above in the elaboration of the present principle of their right to self-determination and freedom and independence. In their actions against, and resistance to, such forcible action in pursuit of the exercise of their right to self-determination, such peoples are entitled to seek and to receive support in accordance with the purposes and principles of the Charter. The territory of a colony or other non-self-governing territory has, under the Charter, a status separate and distinct from the territory of the state administering it, and such separate and distinct status under the Charter shall exist until the people of the colony or non-self-governing territory have exercised their right of self-determination in accordance with the Charter, and particularly its purposes and principles. Nothing in the foregoing paragraphs shall be construed as authorizing or encouraging any action which would dismember or impair, totally or in part, the territorial integrity or political unity of sovereign and independent states conducting themselves in compliance with the principle of equal rights and self-determination of peoples as described above, and thus possessed of a government representing the whole people belonging to the territory without distinction as to race, creed or color. Every state shall refrain from any action aimed at the partial or total disruption of the national unity and territorial integrity of any other state or country. The principle of sovereign equality of states. All states enjoy sovereign equality. They have equal rights and duties and are equal members of the international community, notwithstanding differences of an economic, social, political or other nature. In particular, sovereign equality includes the following elements. States are judicially equal. Each state enjoys the rights inherent in full sovereignty. Each state has the duty to respect the personality of other states. The territorial integrity and political independence of the state are inviolable. Each state has the right freely to choose and develop its political, social, economic and cultural systems. Each state has the duty to comply fully and in good faith with its international obligations and to live in peace with other states. The principle that states shall fulfill in good faith the obligations assumed by them in accordance with the Charter. Every state has the duty to fulfill in good faith the obligations assumed by it in accordance with the Charter of the United Nations. Every state has the duty to fulfill in good faith its obligations under the generally recognized principles and rules of international law. Every state has the duty to fulfill in good faith its obligations under international agreements valid under the generally recognized principles and rules of international law. Where obligations arising under international agreements are in conflict with the obligations of members of the United Nations under the Charter of the United Nations, the obligations under the Charter shall prevail. General Part 2 declares that, in their interpretation and application, the above principles are interrelated and each principle should be construed in the context of the other principles. Nothing in this declaration shall be construed as prejudicing in any manner the provisions of the Charter or the rights and duties of member states under the Charter or the rights of peoples under the Charter, taking into account the elaboration of these rights in this declaration. 3. Declares further that, the principles of the Charter which are embodied in this declaration constitute basic principles of international law, and consequently appeals to all states to be guided by these principles in their international conduct and to develop their mutual relations on the basis of the strict observance of these principles.